Hello, my name is Linus Hagstrom, and I'm a professor of political science at the Swedish Defence University. I'm going to present a new paper published in the Review of International Studies called Unravelling Military Aggression, Ontological Insecurity, Great Power Narcissism, and Japan's International Relations 1868 to 1971. So a few years ago, I introduced the idea of great power narcissism in an article published in International Studies Quarterly. The concept highlights a strange mix of a desire for greatness and exaggerated shame about weakness in great power biographical narratives. I argued that this dynamic renders self-identified great powers ontologically insecure in a way similar to narcissists. Just like narcissists, self-identified great powers are more likely to wage aggression when their sense of pride and shame are negotiated within a narrative of insult. However, I overlooked the distinction between vulnerable and grandiose narcissism in psychology in the previous article and how these relate to shame and pride. And this gap made it harder to understand how narratives of shame and pride evolve into narratives of insult, thus triggering aggression. And although my previous work showed that great power narcissism is prevalent in Chinese and US security policy discourses, it wasn't clear what this concept could help explain. This led me to develop another paper, which is now published in the Review of International Studies, and which I will now present briefly. Now, after reviewing the existing research on great power politics, power transitions, defeat, status, recognition, revisionism and revanchism, and humiliation, I noticed that these studies explore links between challenging events, what I call negative emotions, and military aggression. While this research is very valuable, I was still left with the feeling that it is restricted by its objectivist, rationalist, and causationist inclinations, as well as the tendency to dismiss emotions as irrelevant, irrational, or the mere byproducts of manipulation and material developments. In my article, I explore the connection between challenging events, particularly defeats or power transitions, the collective search of negative emotions such as shame, anger, frustration, humiliation and resentment, and military aggression. Now, notorious examples that seem to underscore the relevance of this analytical relationship include Nazi Germany's aggression during the Second World War, as well as Russia's more recent full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the article, I ask, to what extent do self-identified great powers become aggressive after events that disrupt their sense of greatness? To answer this, I update the concept of great power narcissism exactly by incorporating the distinction between vulnerable and grandiose narcissism. I also differentiate between self-reflectivity and self-reflexivity to explore the extent to which or how such processes of self-identification and ontological security seeking might help mitigate great power narcissism understood as a social and psychological phenomenon. Empirically, I focus on two episodes in Japanese history. While each was marked by equally challenging events, they had quite different outcomes in terms of military aggression. First, during the early Meiji era, Japanese elites initially narrated Japan as weak and inferior to great powers in the imagined West. This vulnerable narrative of shame eventually shifted to one of insult, which increasingly portrayed weakness as an affront which necessitated violent action in order to restore national greatness. Consistent with research on vulnerable narcissism, Japan's aggression was initially covert and indirect, targeting a weakened China in 1894 rather than the peer group Japan sought to join. Now, after defeating China, Japanese identity narratives became more grandiose and preoccupied with pride revolving around Japan's political, economic, and military progress, and in particular, the victory itself. When these grandiose narratives later transformed again into a narrative of insult, this facilitated aggression against a great power peer, as seen when Japan went to war with Russia in 1904. Now, the second case, by contrast, post-war Japan showed unprecedented military restraint, despite the overwhelming defeat that it had encountered and enduring ambitions among conservative elites for great power status and identity. My analysis of speeches by conservative prime ministers between 1950 and 1971 shows a pride-shame dynamic, which is quite similar to the one in the Meiji era. Similar tropes also appeared in opposition speeches, but members from the Japan Socialist Party and political progressives more generally self-reflectively expressed guilt and remorse, while self-reflexively engaging in self-criticism, ultimately by advocating a non-great power identity for Japan. This narrative contestation helped curb Japanese great power narcissism in the post-war era, as the defeat in 1945 wasn't generally linked to negative emotions and calls for revenge. So the main point of my paper is to emphasize that great power status and the meaning of the events that self-identified great powers encounter are inseparable from dominant identity narratives. The article thus understands great power narcissism as a socially and narratively produced predicament of self-identified great powers, but it also proposes self-reflective and self-reflexive counter-narratives as a potential remedy to such developments. Thanks a lot for your attention.